Nicodemus comes to Jesus at night. He's a person who's conflicted. He sees that there is something Jesus is offering that's unique and very powerful, and yet there's something in him that resists really becoming an open disciple, so he comes to him at night. It is, in some way, reflective of human nature, where we begin to see our lives as torn, as Jesus says to the disciples, the spirit is willing, the flesh is weak. Maybe we've experienced that over this Lenten season, where we've tried to deal with areas in our lives that still need reform and renewal and conversion. We allow impatience to take over our lives when others seem to fall short or things don't go right. We allow worry to also preoccupy us, and anxiety. And yes, we allow anger and bitterness to reign in our hearts over past grudges or ways in which people have harmed us. And we find it difficult to say the Our Father, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And the lure of the things of this world, pleasures as well as material possessions, also skew our vision about what's really important in life. We do have those struggles. The spirit is willing and the flesh is weak. And so Jesus gives Nicodemus and all of us today a remedy. He takes that image of how Moses raised the serpent in the desert. The people were bitten by all of these serpents, and they were flying around and biting people, and they knew that death would be coming to them. So God said to Moses, take one, fashion it in bronze, and put it on a pole, and let people look at it. Why? Because it allowed them to face the evil, the death that was there, and knowing that God was still with them through that. And the same too is the Son of Man will be raised up like that in an image as the one who seemed to come into the world, and yet we did the worst thing possible and put him to death. And yet, despite that evil, despite that risk to our salvation, God still saved us. God so loved the world that he gave us his only Son, even giving him to a death on the cross. It's when we look at that cross that we begin to once again convince ourselves that it's not by sheer willpower that we overcome our difficulties, but it is by, as we heard in Ephesians today, by God's grace, which is a gift. And when we see Jesus on the cross, we recall that in fact there is nothing that we cannot overcome with God's, if we have God's grace and we trust in him. You know, it was almost 500 years before the crucifix was part of Christian worship. It was still a scandal to early Christians that Jesus would be figured on with his body on a cross. It was such a powerful symbol. And yet Christians began to realize that it is by Jesus' death on the cross that we remember how much God loves us. And it's in that moment that we experience the grace of our faith that will save us, not by our works, not by our sheer willpower, but realizing that God has saved us. So my recommendation to you during the days that we have left of Lent, especially if you struggle, is to take a crucifix. And look at it, pray before it, and begin to experience how trust in the Lord grows in our hearts. And yes, even a sense of joy that we have been saved by God's grace, not by our own works, not by our own sheer willpower. And that way, find the grace to overcome the difficulties that we face, the impatience, the lust, the greed, the bitterness, the anger, because we place everything before the Lord, trusting that he will give us the grace to be saved. So take time this week. Look at the crucifix and remember the saving power of Jesus giving his life, because it is a reminder that God so loved the world that he gave us his only Son.